Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Robert Branton are joined today by Michael Bonshor, CPA, CMA, and the newly appointed board chair of the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation. Michael brings over 2 decades of experience in Indigenous economic development. He is going to discuss the historic creation of the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, which addresses a long-standing challenge that has persisted for years: Indigenous nations' inability to access affordable capital for economic opportunities in their territories. One of Prime Minister Mark Carney's first acts doubled the fund from $5 billion to $10 billion and expanded its mandate from natural resources and energy to cover all sectors except gaming. With research suggesting actual capital needs approach $100 billion, and with one deal already completed and 40 applications received, Michael will share his insights into this transformative funding mechanism and its potential to redefine Indigenous economic participation across Canada.
Michael Bonshor, welcome to the Drumbeats podcast. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, great to have you here with us, Michael. And it was great to see you a few weeks ago in London. Very nice.
Yes, I brought the good weather with me.
Yes, now it's gone. Okay.
Oh.
Typical English weather. Everyone's complaining about the heat and now it's back to normal. What time is it? Oh, it's sunny. Oh, an hour later, it's raining. So don't you miss those days, Rob? Not really.
A little bit. There's lots of things I miss about the UK and London. Things like Chelsea football club. Rain isn't one of them, though.
Yes.
And Michael, those meetings that Mark referred to were interesting. Canada House convened in foreign UK-based investors and invited a few of us over to talk to them. Why don't you tell us about that experience?
Well, I think I was encouraged by the discussion, but also the fact that Canada House took it as an opportunity to do. And as Canada's looking to expand its partnerships around the world in Western Europe, and considering that inviting First Nations to be part of that conversation is really important and can't be understated, because we haven't always been considered to be part of those conversations in the past at that level. So from that standpoint, it was a good, and the work that you guys are doing with your annual gathering is really testament to how things have changed over the years, and Canada's relationship with the Indigenous community, First Nations and Métis, is really changing and evolving for the most part in a positive way, and those are two evidences of that.
Yeah, and you were there as chair with your chairman's hat on, the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, a brand new corporation, and with $10 billion to work with. We'll talk a little bit about that. Maybe step back and tell us where you're from and a bit about your upbringing, your community.
Sure, I should more properly introduce myself, but there's a Gila Klasa Namut Nugam Ikawigalau Guy Kala Muskamuk Zawadenok. So I'm a Ikawigalau is one of my given names. I'm from the Muskamuk Zawadenok tribe in the Zawadenok First Nation, which is sort of on the mainland coast of British Columbia. And in terms of my background, my focus the past 20 years or so has been primarily working with First Nation governments, First Nations business interests, and kind of what led me to that was I had finished my in my 20s, late 20s. I finished my what was a CMA is now a CPA, and I was working in industry, and I'd wanted to figure out how I could support our communities, how I could support working with First Nations, not really having a destination in mind or a target in mind, and things are much different back then in terms of the opportunities. But fortuitously, I was offered an opportunity to work with the Bank of Montreal. They had opened up a branch on the Tshot Reserve on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And Bank of Montreal, like a lot of the major banks at that time, were ramping up their First Nations efforts. And fellow, I'm sure you know, Ron Jameson was the head of BMO's Indigenous Aboriginal, it was probably called Aboriginal back then, banking area. And we're embarking on opening up branches on reserve. And so I took one of those positions, and it was an excellent learning experience in terms of learning about working with the community, with the West Coast, the First Nations of the West Coast of Vancouver Island and the Channel, working in the sort of the banking environments, doing commercial lending and personal lending, and running a branch. I was the branch manager, and so it was a great experience. And it started with my first exposure to working in the space. I sort of took that opportunity and took the learnings and kind of made a decision that to have what I thought the most amount of impact and to make a difference was to work more directly with communities. And so I took a position back in the mainland working with a group of 19 First Nations running their development corporation and their inaugural development corporation for a tribe, just an hour, a tribe of 24, just about an hour or so east of Vancouver. And did that for about 5 years. And it was another really strong learning experience in terms of how to work within the governance of 24 First Nations, 19 that were part of that collective, and building business and investment opportunities from that context. It was at a different time. The treaty process had just started up. Some landmark Supreme Court cases are just coming into play. The Haida, Tucker River Clinton cases were really starting to define sort of the economic space that First Nations should have related to their title and rights. And I've been kind of working in that space in various forms ever since. So working with some national firms, working through my own company, sort of as the evolution of First Nations business and economic development was growing. So it's increasingly expanding in terms of the opportunities and the scale and the scope. And one of my most recent initiatives work-wise was starting up an association of development corporations. So in 2020, I started an association with 3 development corporations, and we're up to just over 90 BC First Nations owned development corporations now. Try to work on important issues such as their own capacity to govern and manage themselves, working with federal government and provincial government to help shape how they work with First Nations in terms of providing the economic room and creating partnerships as well, and working with industry in some new areas like tech and innovation. So it's all about, I know the term economic reconciliation is kind of popular. We've kind of coined the term, we've sort of guided our work by calling it economic reconstruction, in that we really want to instill, in this case, BC First Nations into the economic fabric of the provincial economy. And
what's the name of that organization, Mike?
The BC First Nations Business Development Association, FNBDA. So we're into our 5th year now. It's really interesting work that's always changing, always growing. We're finding new areas to grow and develop, and sort of leveraging. I mean, aside from doing the work to create the capacity tools and create industry and government partnerships, it's really about being a venue to bring First Nations-owned development corporations together to share their successes, share their issues, and share their ideas about how to work together. And that's certainly something that's we're seeing it more and more now. Groups of First Nations working together that maybe haven't worked together before, because it's one of the strongest ways to leverage our position, to leverage our economic participation. All of this time, I've been fortunate to spend time on a number of boards as well. I sit on the National Indigenous Economic Development Board, which provides sort of policy advice and does some work in and around the federal government. On a few inaugural boards in BC as well, the one related to gaming revenue sharing, one related to health. BC First Nations were the first group to sort of take over the responsibility of managing and governing health dollars. And so we've got all 204 First Nations working together on delivering health resources to communities and community members. So, and most recently appointed as chair of the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation this past spring, which is a real honor and a privilege to be a part of that as well.
Yes, congratulations. And that's you're the inaugural chair for the organization. So you have the joy of setting up the top team.
Yes.
How is that progressing? And can you maybe explain a little bit about CDEV? Because some of our listeners and viewers over here in the UK would not really understand where it sits.
Yeah, so the Canadian Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, CILGC. There's a lot of acronyms here, but the CILGC is a subsidiary of CDEV, which is the Canadian Investment Development Corporation. I think that the acronym doesn't line up, but they're our parent. They're a Crown corporation as well. They hold we're one of 7, I think, subsidiaries to CDEV, and so they oversee Trans Mountain, the Canada Growth Fund. Anytime, I guess they've been around for about 40 years, I believe. So anytime that the federal government needs to sort of step into the business ownership space, they've used the CDEV as a vehicle to do that, and they've chosen CDEV as, and I'm glad they did. They've chosen CDEV as the vehicle to help shepherd the development of the CILGC as well. So it's we're kind of going through that.
Sorry, Michael, would you also explain Crown Corporation? It's interesting coming to the UK, Rob, you probably felt that at the same time as well. Because in Canada, we grew up with Crown corporations everywhere, although we have a bit of a virtual monarchy, and you come over to the UK and...
Yeah, sure, certainly. Thanks, Mark, for asking me to clarify that. So Crown corporations are essentially corporations that are owned by the federal government. And so there are federal Crown corporations, and some of our provinces also have sat on some provincial Crown corporations as well. And so sometimes the federal government or the provincial government, they choose to do certain aspects of their business through a separate legal entity. And so they set up these separate Crown corporations. So we're intended to be sort of autonomous bodies. So we'll have our own board of directors, our own governance, our own staff, and so on. And we'll do that aspect of the work sort of under the federal government umbrella through CDEV.
So what will the new loan guarantee corporation do, Michael? I know provide guarantees, maybe some other things, but why was it set up? What is the gap in the market? Why does it matter?
Yeah, it's a fair question. The way I see it, going back to the cases I referenced earlier, the Haida case, Taku River Tlingit cases, and other cases that there's been, a couple hundred cases that First Nations have been successful in the Supreme Court, and a lot of them sort of spell out the existence of an attachment, ownership, and an economic attachment to the lands and resources in some cases First Nations territory. And so the one of the hindrances in the Indigenous communities realizing on that economic value has been the lack of affordable capital. And so there's been a lot of restrictions in place, some brought about by the Indian Act that governs First Nations here in Canada, and other considerations, capacity, another issue, have prohibited First Nations from fully realizing the economic value of their attachment to the lands and resources in their territory. And so where they may have been provided an opportunity to be an equity investor in a company or an activity in their territory, the cost of the capital was prohibitive. It was costing them 10% to make 8%, an 8% return, for example, just in terms of simple math. And so the notion of a loan guarantees has been advocated for a number of years by First Nations and Indigenous groups from across the country to bring down the cost of capital to make equity investments where Indigenous communities want to be owners in projects and companies in their territories more realizable. And so the in 2023 federal budget, Canadian federal budget, they earmarked $5 billion to be provided as loan guarantees. So it's just this past December that the Loan Guarantee Corporation was established. So not quite a year. In the spring of this year, just in the midst of the transition to the new government here, Mark Carney, who became Prime Minister, doubled the fund to $10 billion. The initial $5 billion was earmarked only for energy and natural resource projects. The doubling of the fund to $10 billion also came with an expansion of the mandate as well. So we can provide loan guarantees to Indigenous groups in almost every other sector aside from those two now. And so through our working relationship with CDEB and the resources made available, keeping in mind we haven't been around for a year yet, we've already employed $400 million of that to a group of 38 First Nations here in BC to take a 12% ownership stake in an Enbridge asset. So it's really exciting to have started off this way already. And so this was infrastructure that had been, it's exciting from a couple different perspectives. One, this is infrastructure that's been sitting in their territories for 40 years, and they've had no relationship to it, certainly no economic relationship to that infrastructure. And now, by coming together, this group of First Nations, and if you can appreciate the complexity of it, we're talking a number of tribal groups, a number of language groups from the northeast of British Columbia down to the Fraser Valley of BC, partnering together, working together to come to a solution with an industry partner to take an ownership stake in that. So communities are going to, and this is part of one of the overarching mandates of CILGC, is to enable loan guarantees that can provide for economic benefits at the outset to Indigenous investors. And so they'll start to see, so after 40 years of not having any economic relationship to it, they'll as soon as it's finalized now, they'll start to receive economic benefits almost immediately with that investment. So it's an excellent first model for us, first initiative for us, and we're really happy to have been a part of it.
So under this federal program, you get private lenders to provide the capital, and the Canadian government stands behind the nations who are borrowing that capital. And with that guarantee, there's a less risk to the private sector lender, and so a lower interest rate. As far as I can tell, there's no limits on where that investor has to come from, so it doesn't need to be a Canadian lender. It could be a foreign-based lender, and the Canadian market, as tight as it is for some of these projects, tend to be a long-term loan, and our Canadian banks don't provide long-term loans, sort of 6 to 7 years would be their maximum. And so you have life insurance companies who do provide the longer term capital, but that's a small market in Canada. So there's maybe a bit of an opportunity for foreign lenders who are prepared to lend at longer terms to be in this market and take advantage of some of the guarantee programs like your own.
Yeah, and ourselves and other jurisdictions like the province of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Ontario also have loan guarantee programs and regimes in place as well. And so it's I think it's a critically important opportunity for the Indigenous community in Canada, but I think it's also an interesting opportunity for the capital markets here in Canada, and as you said, overseas as well, having loans backed by the federal government here or the provincial and federal governments here. I think results in a really attractive, long-term, stable investment for international markets as well. And thanks for the work that you guys are doing in the UK to help create that awareness and understanding, because I think that's where this kind of starts. That's where this conversation starts, is sort of Indigenous communities learning about the opportunities outside of Canada, and the capital markets area and areas outside of Canada learning a bit about what is this. What is this First Nation? What is this Indigenous thing? And because I think uh, internationally, Canada is known as obviously a stable place to do business, a stable investment environment, uh, um, rich in resources, uh, a stable trade partner, and so on. And so I think it's just a matter of putting all those pieces together.
Yes, and I think the other thing for our viewers and listeners is there were treaty rights which weren't respected, and then there were areas of unceded territory that no treaty had been negotiated with, and this is particular in BC. But I think the other constraint people may not appreciate is that then the infamous Indian Act, which still exists in some form, put additional restraints, and this is where you're coming about ability to secure lending against assets, because the Indian Act actually prevents or lending against Indigenous lands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the Indigenous community here, by and large, has been absent from the sort of the project financing field. Has been absent from a lot of the opportunities that occur in the Canadian and international capital markets field. And so, I think here in Canada, um, the Indigenous community has found innovative ways to make those connections, and where the Loan Guarantee Corporation is sort of one additional tool to make to help enable economic change, because not just for the Indigenous community, but I think also for the broader community, the both industry and just the Canadian economy in general. This is, if we can enable greater investment here, it's going to benefit not just the Indigenous community but everybody.
Yes, and Prime Minister Carney's just been over in Berlin, and he specifically talked about the partnership with the Indigenous people to make new projects happening. They were talking particularly about LNG for Germany, as Germany came a number of years ago, and the government wasn't responsive because, well, it's on the West Coast, and I'm sure there are other issues as well. But now all those issues are on the table with the economic crisis or opportunity that many countries are now facing with the U.S. rearranging its trading relationships. And I think the other things important is yourself and Rob are, first generations who are in positions of authority. So for investors looking at Canada, there's a whole new team of people to deal with that they couldn't reach before because the frameworks weren't available, the loan guarantees and the structure, and you didn't have Indigenous people at the table the same way as you are today, being able to fight and secure the best deal that your rights entitle you to, which actually, as you mentioned, will present new opportunities, not just for the Indigenous people, but for all Canadians and foreign investors as well. Because now there is a way to get things done because the Indigenous people are having their rights.
Yeah, there's a real vested interest in inclusion in these conversations and opportunities with the Canadian Indigenous community. I think the Canadian government has been consistent in its messaging and approach that during this building or rebuilding of Canada's economy and building up opportunities, creating more self-reliance, self-determination, that it's going to be done with the Indigenous community. And that's not language, and those aren't words that we've always heard from provincial or federal levels of government. And so it's a real opportunity to realize on that and put in place things like the Loan Guarantee Corporation, put in place Indigenous voices, and as you said, Mark, and around the boardroom table, and leading organizations and so on, and adding that informed voice of what this means and how important it is, and the impact it can have in Indigenous communities. And so we've been trying to rebuild our own economies for a long time, and so we're very familiar with the approach. We're very familiar with the intent, and the context is a bit bigger now. And but I think we're very much aligned, First Nations and the Indigenous community generally, very much aligned with the motivation and sentiment to create economic opportunities that are going to benefit people, community members, for our own safety and security and well-being.
Yes, without a doubt. One of the other issues that comes back dealing with Canada as foreign investors is there's different levels of government and a lot of players around the table. And one of them is also, I call it the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. So how will you be working or complementing their efforts?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is I like to see it as we're part of the larger family of resources available to the Indigenous community. So the Canadian Indigenous Bank, the First Nation fiscal institutions like the Financial Management Board and the First Nations Finance Authority, and ourselves, we're all working towards the same end. We're all working towards wealth creation and economic sustainability for the Indigenous community, Indigenous communities in Canada. And so we're all structured, we're all a little bit different, and we all have a little bit different purposes and mandate. For instance, the CIB is as I mentioned in our first loan guarantee example, we're generally looking for more projects that are at development or latter stage development, so that we can enable economic benefits to start to flow as soon as possible. And so that may create some timing issues. CIB may come in a bit earlier, but I think there's ways for us to work together. And so we want to ensure that these nation building projects, aren't established in such a way that are prohibitive for Indigenous inclusion. And so we're working. We haven't been in place quite a year yet. We're going to have a formal review in the next year as well to look at our overall mandate and structure to ensure that we're being as effective as possible, including effective as possible in terms of how we work and organize ourselves with our other partners.
Yeah, you're a great example of the new tools, as you say, that are available, and anyone trying to compare today versus 10 or 15 years ago, and asking what is different about Canadian Indigenous investment landscape. It is the tools that you've highlighted, and the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program is just the latest, but there are many, and many are Indigenous led, like the First Nations Finance Authority, and some of the others. So those tools, many Indigenous led, and are now available to support the financing efforts and allow Indigenous communities to take their place at the board table.
Yeah, I recall a conversation that came up at the High Commission in London about, I think one of the delegates were asking about like what are the innovative ways in which the Indigenous community can approach financing. And as I recall, I think my reply was more towards, I think First Nations and the Indigenous community has been innovative the past 20 years. We've had to develop the structures and develop the approaches to be able to meet sort of the capital market standards and the capital market frameworks. And so I think the Indigenous community hasn't been shy about doing what's necessary to create the right structures and solutions to make that happen. If I recall, I kind of put the question back to them. It's like, what can you do? What can you be doing differently to meet the needs of the Indigenous community in these projects here in Canada as well? So we can meet somewhere in the middle. And I think maybe that resonated in terms of, like I said earlier, it comes with understanding first. And so I appreciate that folks have to go through a bit of a learning exercise to understand what is a CILGC and, what is a First Nation versus an Inuit community and so on. And people need to understand those dynamics. But with that knowledge, how can they augment the approaches and the solutions that are developed so that we can continue to work and grow together?
Your guarantee program is brand new, one loan deployed. I bet you have demand across the country to get involved, but provincial loan guarantee programs and other supports have been in place over the last 10 years. Do you know if Canadian taxpayers have ever had to pony up as a loan, has a guarantee actually ever been called?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, I think
I think the answer is no, because I've asked that of some of the others, and no, there's never been a guarantee actually called. These programs have run pretty efficiently.
A bit of an aside, but I have a friend that operates an Aboriginal Capital Corporation in British Columbia, and he's been working as their general manager for nearly 30 years. And he's never called a First Nations loan. They provide loans to First Nations and First Nation entrepreneurs. He's never called a First Nations loan. He's never had a First Nation miss a payment. And so that's without a loan guarantee. And so I think in a lot of cases, the Indigenous community and First Nations have a unique connection to the business and investment opportunities that they pursue. We've been here a long time. we expect to be here for a long time, and so I think that changes our perspective and deepens our commitment to ensuring that projects and investments happen successfully.
Yes, that's quite a story. That's who investors want to be dealing with, right? Never had to act on a guarantee.
Yeah.
People who are going to be there for a long time, right? You've been there for millennia, tens of thousands of years, and will be, I have no doubt.
Yeah, to your question, Rob, earlier about, we have done the one transaction already. Keeping in mind, these are large, sometimes complex transactions that happen that take a while to put together with a number of parties. But we've received over 40 applications. We're actively involved in over 20 of them now. We do expect to do more deals before the end of this year, and so we expect to move through upwards of over $1 billion just this fiscal year as we ramp up our team, just based on the level of interest and the kinds of conversations we're having now. So we're generally pleased with the amount of progress that we're making, and with a multitude of First Nations and groups of First Nations. And so I can't understate that in terms of the importance of First Nations and Indigenous groups working together. It's really impactful.
We can't really end the conversation without talking about what's your view on the ground at the moment with what the next 6-12 months are looking like. The Building Canada Act's been passed. There's continuing discussions. But what's your sense of the way ahead and how the road is looking?
Yeah, we're going to be announcing more guarantees. We're going to be, in very short order, we'll be announcing our board, or the rest of our inaugural board, actively pursuing the senior leadership team, CEO, and we've been to build on the resources that we've been leveraging through CDEV. We're going to be actively out in the community, understanding where they're at, understanding where their opportunities are. So we're going to take a real proactive approach to establishing those trusting relationships with the Indigenous community, with industry, with government, and also, the loan guarantees and the loan guarantee corporation was put in place prior to a lot of the current discussion around the nation building initiatives and projects of national interest and so on. So we'll work to find ways to ensure that we're sort of seamlessly aligned with that work too, and as well as the other projects that we're involved in. Our relationship with Ministry of Finance in Ottawa is important. And 6 months from now, we'll probably be seeing Chelsea lift a trophy or two, and most of us will be happy.
More trophies for Chelsea.
That's right.
Michael, what do you do in your spare time? How do you relax?
Yeah, speaking of football, I still trudge around a soccer field on the regular. Although I've tried to do less of that. My knees have asked me to do less of that. But I do like to play a bit of golf this time of year as well, and do a bit of running, try to stay physically active as possible, just sort of balance things out. And I mentioned I was from the Dowdin First Nation, Kinkum Inlet, and are really fortunate in that we're a very culturally strong community and family. And so we've been able to potlatch a couple, 3 times in the recent past, and some of my uncles are putting bugs in my ear about we need to do that again as they age. And so I look forward to continuing to grow and evolve with our family in a cultural way too.
That's great. And again, historical, at one time, potlatch was banned.
Yeah, well,
right?
You might want to. Our community is so remote that during the ban,
Was never banned there.
Well, it was just such a hard place to get to that the government and the government representatives like, do we have to go up there? Especially it's November. Wow. So the end result of that is we retained a lot of our cultural strength, our family. Yeah, so we've been fortunate that way.
Oh, that's great. Robert.
Michael, anything we haven't discussed that you would like to discuss?
No, I think we covered off a lot of ground. I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing with the CILGC and the other initiatives that we're working on. I think the other aspect that I didn't touch on, if I could, is just the ongoing need for solutions related to community capacity. And so it's sort of a focus of our Business Development Association, but it's also a solution that needs to be tied to the loan guarantees as well. There's been a lot of focus on sort of transactional capacity to make deals happen and so on, and hire smart people like Rob. But I think we also want to do this in a way that retains some lasting capacity in communities so that the economic benefits that they garner can be put to additional use as they start to come through the community. So that's didn't want to miss that opportunity to talk about, that we're also very mindful of supporting Indigenous communities' capacity too.
Yes, very important. Very important.
Thank you, Michael, for joining us, taking time out. I know it's busy times at CILGP and all the other things you're involved with. So appreciate taking a bit of time to talk to us about.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. And I've had an opportunity to listen to most of your episodes, your podcast episodes, and I found them really engaging. So thanks for the work that you guys are doing as well.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you at the summit in April back in the Square Mile. And please listen to this podcast.
for sure. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to Michael Bonshor for sharing his insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Mark your calendars for the upcoming 2026 summit taking place on the 8th of April. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.